My name is Margaret Wilson Taylor, though most folks here in Springfield, Missouri just call me Ms. Margaret. I am 74 years old, with silver hair I no longer bother dyeing, and hands that have held more babies than I can count. Some born crying, some born silent. For over 40 years I was a nurse. But long before I ever stepped into a hospital, I learned the sound of suffering inside my own home. I still remember the night my world changed. The night I screamed through labor pains, clutching the sheets so hard that my nails tore the fabric. I was only 17, my sweat mixed with blood on the wooden floor, and the midwife's face blurred through my tears. And then I heard a voice behind me, a low whisper, sharp as a knife. It was my father.
"You should never have been born," he hissed, "and neither should this one."
He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a smile carved into his face like something cruel etched in stone. My mother tried to shoo him away, but he only laughed. And as my body gave way, as I brought life into the world, the one who should have protected me looked on with satisfaction at my suffering. Hours later, when silence filled the room, I stared at the cradle beside me. Empty. My baby was gone, just like the light in my chest. I asked where she was, but no one would answer. My father only grinned, like a man who had finally won. That was the night I realized some battles are not fought with fists or guns, but with secrets, stolen futures, and whispered curses in the dark. And what happened to my baby that night? Well, that is a truth I kept buried for more than 50 years. But secrets have a way of clawing back to the surface, no matter how deep you bury them. I was born in Willow Creek, Missouri in 1951, a town so small you could hear the church bells no matter where you stood. To the neighbors, we were the respectable Taylor family. My father, Franklin Taylor, the proud owner of the general store. My mother, Mary Louise, the seamstress whose hands stitched half the town's wedding gowns. My older brother Robert, quiet and obedient. And my younger sister Lily, the golden child with curls like spun sugar. And then there was me, the middle child nobody seemed to want. My father never looked at me the way he looked at Robert. For Robert, there were nods of approval, long lessons at the store counter, and talk of the future. For Lily, there were presents and soft words, her laughter enough to melt even his stern frown. But for me, there was only silence or sharpness, a correction for standing wrong, a growl if I spoke out of turn. Sometimes his eyes slid over me as if I were a ghost haunting my own family. Yet my mother, she tried. She would brush my hair at night and whisper, "Margaret, you're my strong one. You'll outgrow this house one day. You'll find your own light." Her voice was soft, but I clung to it like a prayer. Still, shadows grew inside our home. By the time I was 10, I could smell the whiskey on my father's coat before he even stepped through the door. The sound of his boots on the porch boards would make my stomach twist. Nights became dangerous. An overturned table, a slap, a shattered plate against the wall. My mother would clean in silence, Robert would hide in the store, and Lily would cry until her little body shook. I would grip my ragdoll Rosie and whisper promises to her that one day we'd leave. That one day we wouldn't flinch at footsteps or dread the creak of the floorboards. But children's promises are fragile things. One night, when I was 12, I peeked through the kitchen doorway. My father had my mother by the arm, his face inches from hers, his voice like venom. I couldn't hear all the words, but I caught the ending clear as day. "She never should have been born, Mary. That girl is a curse." And then his eyes, cold, hard, shifted and locked on me. After that night, I started avoiding home whenever I could. I'd linger by the creek, pretend to study late at school, or, when I was lucky, slip across town to my Aunt Hazel's house. Hazel was my mother's older sister, unmarried, with silver streaks in her dark hair, and a laugh that filled every corner of her little home. People in Willow Creek called her a midwife, but to me she was more like a magician. Her shelves were lined with jars of herbs, roots, and strange teas that smelled of wild earth. "Pay attention, Maggie," she would tell me, placing a sprig of dried chamomile in my hand. "God gave us these things to heal. Someday, you'll need to know." I didn't fully understand then, but I listened. I always listened. With her, I learned to mix teas for fever, salves for burns, and poultices for bruises. But what fascinated me most were the births. Sometimes when the call came, she'd let me follow. I would stand in the shadows of someone's bedroom, wide-eyed, as Hazel coaxed life into the world. She had a way of holding a woman's hand, whispering, "Breathe, my child. Your body knows what to do." That calmed storms. And when the cry of a newborn filled the air, my heart leapt with wonder. For those hours, I forgot the heavy silence of my own home. I forgot my father's eyes. One evening, after a long delivery, Hazel wiped her brow and looked at me with something like recognition. "You've got it in you, Maggie," she said. "The gift, the hands that heal." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever looked at me like that before. Not as a burden, not as a curse, but as someone meant for something. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time, I thought maybe my life could be bigger than the walls of that yellow house. But even as hope stirred, the shadows at home grew darker. My father began to notice my absences. And one night, when I came home late from Hazel's, smelling of herbs and smoke, he stopped me at the door. His jaw clenched. His hand gripped my shoulder too tightly.
"You think you're better than this family, girl? You should never have been born."
By the time I turned 13, I had learned the art of silence. In my house, silence was safety. If you spoke too much, you risked the back of my father's hand. If you asked questions, you earned his scorn. So I spoke only when I had to, and I saved my words for school or for Aunt Hazel.
You've got curious eyes, Margaret. Never lose that.
Don't leave me, Maggie. You're destroying this family, Frank.
The slap that followed rang louder than church bells. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt determination. I would not stay trapped in that house forever. My father's words, "You should never have been born," no longer made me shrink. They hardened me. I would prove him wrong, but destiny has a way of testing even the strongest promises. The following week, Hazel let me accompany her to a difficult birth. The woman laboured for hours, her cries shaking the walls of the little farmhouse. Hazel worked calmly, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Then there was a knock on the door. It was Dr. William Schmidt, the young physician newly arrived from Chicago. His presence filled the room, steady and commanding. Together, he and Hazel fought for both mother and child. And when at last a baby's cry broke through the night, I felt something shift inside me.
As we stepped outside under the Missouri stars, Dr. Schmidt looked at me and said, "You have good hands, girl, hands that were born to heal." I blushed, clutching those words as if they were treasure.
But what I didn't know was that my father would soon discover my secret visits, and that his punishment would change everything. The night I came home from that delivery with Aunt Hazel and Dr. Schmidt, I was still glowing inside, holding on to his words like a lantern in the dark. Good hands, hands born to heal. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a burden, but as someone who mattered. But the moment I stepped through our front door, the light went out. My father was waiting. He sat in his chair by the stove, whiskey glass in hand, his eyes cold as stone. "Where have you been?" His voice was low, dangerous. "At Hazel's," I said too quickly. His jaw tightened. "Running around with that spinster and her witchcraft, learning to be a nobody. You think you're better than this family, girl?" I shook my head, but the truth was burning in my chest. I did think I was meant for more than this house of shadows. He stood, and before I could move, his hand clamped down on my arm. Pain shot through me as his fingers dug deep. "I told your mother," he hissed. "You never should have been born. And mark my words, Margaret. If you keep chasing this nonsense, you'll end up with nothing. Nothing." I wanted to scream, to fight back. Instead, I swallowed the fire and stayed silent. That was survival. But inside, something hardened. That night, as I lay awake, listening to Lily's soft breathing beside me, I whispered a vow. I would become a nurse. I would escape this house, this man, this curse he kept trying to carve into my bones. And then, fate gave me a sign. The next morning, Sister Catherine from St. Mary's pulled me aside after class. "Margaret," she said, her eyes kind but serious, "I've seen your grades. I know your circumstances at home. Mercy Hospital in Springfield is offering scholarships for girls who want to study nursing. I've already put your name forward." My heart stopped. Nursing school. A real chance. A door opening where I thought only walls existed. But I also knew what my father would say, what he would do. And I was right. When I told him weeks later, during a quiet supper, his fork clattered against the plate. "Over my dead body," he spat. "No daughter of mine is leaving this house to shame this family. You'll marry some decent man here in Willow Creek, and that's the end of it." But this time, my mother surprised me. She looked him straight in the eye, her voice trembling but steady. "No, Frank, she will go. Our daughter deserves this chance." I had never seen her defy him so openly. For a moment, silence filled the room like thunder. My father's face turned crimson, his fist trembling above the table. And then, without a word, he stormed out into the night. The train ride to Springfield was the longest journey of my life, not because of the distance, but because of what it meant. Each mile that clicked beneath the wheels carried me further from my father's shadow, further from the suffocating walls of Willow Creek. For the first time, the world felt wide, uncertain, and full of possibility. Mother had pressed a small parcel into my hands before I left. Inside were two things: the silver locket her mother had given her, and $3 bills she had hidden away from years of sewing work. "This isn't much, Margaret," she whispered, "but it's everything I can give you. Make it count." I hugged her until I couldn't breathe, memorizing the smell of her hair, the feel of her trembling arms. Lily cried quietly into my skirt, and Robert, who never cried, pressed a folded note into my palm. "Don't read it until you're gone," he muttered. I kept it tucked close to my chest as the train pulled away. When I opened it hours later, his scrawled words blurred through my tears. "Be braver than me. Don't come back." Springfield was another world. Mercy Hospital stood like a cathedral, its stone walls towering above the cobblestone streets. Inside, the air was sharp with disinfectant, buzzing with the footsteps of nurses in white uniforms and the echo of doctors' commands. I felt small, but also alive. The training was grueling. We rose before dawn, our days filled with lessons in anatomy, endless rounds of scrubbing, and long nights tending to patients who clung to life by the thinnest thread. My hands blistered, my back ached, but every time I bandaged a wound or eased someone's fever, I felt a deep certainty. This was where I belonged. And then there was Dr. William Schmidt. I hadn't expected to see him again, but one afternoon he appeared in the ward, his white coat gleaming. He recognized me instantly. "The girl with good hands," he said, smiling. He took time to explain things others brushed past. He showed me how to listen to the body's whispers, not just its screams. And though I told myself he was only being kind, my heart began to betray me. I caught myself lingering on the way his voice softened when speaking to patients, the way his eyes lit up with curiosity and conviction. But Springfield was not without hardship. Many townspeople whispered that women had no place in medicine, that we were wasting our youth in starched uniforms instead of wedding gowns. I heard the echoes of my father in every sneer. Still, I pressed on. One winter evening, after a brutal day of tending to an influenza outbreak, I collapsed in the dormitory, my body shaking from exhaustion. I wondered if perhaps my father had been right, that I wasn't strong enough, that I didn't belong. and then came a knock at the door. A fellow student handed me a letter. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. It was my mother's. My hands trembled as I tore it open. "Margaret, your father is getting worse. Robert is keeping us afloat, but I fear for Lily. Do not come back, child, no matter what. You must finish what you've started. You are our hope now." Tears blurred the ink as I read those words over and over. I wasn't just chasing my dream anymore, I was carrying theirs. Springfield in the winter of 1918 was a city under siege, not by soldiers, but by sickness. The influenza came like a ghost, slipping into homes, filling wards, stealing breath from the young and the strong as easily as the old. The hospital bell never stopped tolling. We worked until our bodies begged for rest, then we worked more. Cots lined every hallway, children whimpered for mothers already gone, and priests walked ward to ward offering last rites until their voices broke. I had thought myself strong, but nothing prepared me for the sound of lungs drowning in their own fluid, or the sight of boys no older than Robert gasping for air like fish out of water. Some nights, I held patients' hands until they grew cold, because there was no one else left to do it. It was in those endless nights that Dr. Schmidt became more than a teacher to me. He moved with tireless determination, sleeves rolled up, face shadowed with fatigue, but eyes burning bright. "We can't save them all," he said once, his voice raw, "but we save who we can, and that is enough." When my hands shook, he steadied them. When despair gnawed at me, he reminded me of the lives we had pulled back from the brink. And slowly, silently, something grew between us, not spoken, not confessed, but real. One night, after we lost a child I had tended for 3 days straight, I broke. I ran into the courtyard, the cold air biting my face, tears spilling faster than I could stop them. Dr. Schmidt found me there. "You can't carry them all, Margaret," he said softly. I shook my head, choking out the words. "But if I don't, who will?" He looked at me then, really looked, as though searching my soul. And instead of answering, he simply took my hand. But tragedy was never far. One afternoon, a fellow nurse collapsed beside me. Within hours, she was fighting for her life in the very ward we had served together. Fear swept through us like wildfire. Every cough became a death knell. We washed our hands until the skin split, but nothing seemed to stop the tide. That night, I knelt by my cot, the locket from Mother clutched in my hands. For the first time, I prayed, not for myself, but for strength. Strength to keep going when everything inside me screamed to give up. And in that silence, I made another vow. I would not only endure, I would rise. Because if the world could break me so easily, what hope was left for my mother, for Lily, for every other girl born into silence like me? The influenza was merciless, and yet, in the midst of so much death, I began to feel something dangerously alive inside me. It was the way my heart leapt when I caught sight of Dr. Schmidt across the ward, his brow furrowed in concentration, his voice steady even as chaos roared around him. For weeks we worked side by side, stitching wounds of both flesh and spirit. He trusted me with cases no other trainee touched, and when exhaustion dragged me down, he lifted me with nothing more than a glance that seemed to say, "You can do this. I believe in you." But feelings like these were dangerous. In the dormitory at night, I pressed my hand to my chest, scolding myself. I was a student, he was a physician, and the world was already cruel enough to women who dared dream beyond marriage. Still, no amount of logic could quiet the way my pulse raced whenever our hands brushed. Then came the night, everything changed. A man in his 20s was brought in, burning with fever, lungs rattling like a broken bellows. We worked for hours, but his strength failed him. When his breath finally ceased, I stumbled back, trembling.
You gave him peace, Margaret. That matters.
I looked up into his tired eyes, and for a moment, the whole world fell away. The distance we had both kept broke like a dam. His lips found mine, gentle, searching, filled with everything words could not say.
There are battles worth fighting. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
In the weeks that followed, our bond deepened in quiet, unspoken ways. A stolen moment in the stairwell, a letter slipped into my apron pocket, a touch that lingered just a second too long. Love, in its fragile, hidden form, had found me in the middle of death. But Springfield was not free of tongues that wagged. I overheard whispers in the halls, nurses muttering about the Schmidt girl, elders warning that I was too bold, too close, too seen. Their words stung, but I clung to the memory of his kiss like a secret flame. And yet, even flames can burn. One bitter January morning, as we prepared to make rounds, Dr. Schmidt's face was pale, his steps unsteady. He waved off my concern with a faint smile. "Just tired," he said. But I saw the sweat beading his brow, the cough he tried to hide. My blood turned to ice. The influenza, the enemy we had fought side by side for months, had come for him. The first time I saw Dr. Schmidt falter, I told myself it was only exhaustion. But by the second day there was no denying it. His cough was deep, his skin fevered, his breath ragged. The influenza had caught him in its merciless grip. I wanted to cry, to scream, but there was no time for either. He was admitted into the very ward we had walked together 100 times. Only now he was the patient, and I was the one standing over him with trembling hands. "Don't look at me like that, Margaret," he whispered, his lips cracked, his eyes glassy. "I'll be fine." But I saw the truth in the rise and fall of his chest, each breath a battle, each word an effort. For weeks, we had stood shoulder to shoulder against the tide. Now I fought alone. I tended him as I had tended countless others, sponging his burning skin, coaxing sips of water past his parched lips, praying with every heartbeat that he would not slip into that final stillness I had seen too many times before. The whispers around the hospital grew louder. Some said it was improper for me to devote so much attention to him. Others muttered that God was punishing him for getting too close to one of his nurses. I ignored them all. None of their words mattered. What mattered was the man gasping for life beneath my hands. One night, when his fever raged and delirium blurred his eyes, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Margaret," he rasped, promise me you'll keep fighting, even if I don't." I pressed my lips to his hand, tears falling hot and fast. "Don't you dare speak like that. You're not leaving me. Not like this." For 3 endless nights I scarcely slept. I measured his breaths, counted the beats of his pulse, whispered stories of Willow Creek, of Lily and Robert, of my dreams for the future, as if words alone could anchor him to this world. And then, on the dawn of the 4th day, the fever broke. He slept like a man returning from battle, his chest rising and falling with steadier rhythm. Relief swept over me so fiercely I nearly collapsed beside his bed. When he finally woke, weak but alive, his eyes found mine. A faint smile touched his lips. "Good hands," he whispered, the same words he had spoken that first night under the Missouri stars. But even as joy filled me, I knew the fight was not over. Springfield still reeled under the grip of influenza, and our closeness had painted a target on my back. Love was a dangerous luxury for a woman in my place, and fate had a way of reminding me that every victory came with a price. The influenza had not broken me, losing patients had not broken me, nearly losing William, Dr. Schmidt, had nearly shattered me, but nothing prepared me for the quiet cruelty of 2 nurses in stiff white uniforms waiting for me in the corridor.
"Margaret O'Donnell, your conduct has been noted. You've shown undue attention to one patient, a physician no less. It has been whispered that you are compromised, that your devotion is not professional."
He was dying. Would you have had me leave him to the fever?
We all have patients we care for, Miss O'Donnell, but we do not let sentiment cloud duty. Favoritism in this hospital will not be tolerated. You will report to the Mother Superior tomorrow morning. She will decide your future here.
Their footsteps echoed away, leaving me trembling in the hallway. I wanted to scream, to tell them how I had watched William fight death itself, how I had fought with him, not out of sentiment, but out of love. But love was the very word I could not speak. Love was dangerous. Love could ruin me. That night, I knelt by my cot, mother's locket cold in my hand. I thought of Willow Creek, of my father's fists, of Robert's note, "Don't come back." I had clawed my way here, to this place of purpose, of healing. I would not let them take it from me. When morning came, I walked into the Mother Superior's office with my chin lifted.
I have heard the concerns raised against you, Miss O'Donnell, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. You have been accused of impropriety. Do you wish to answer?
My heart hammered. I thought of William, pale but alive, whispering good hands. I thought of my mother's letter, begging me never to come back. And then I thought of myself, not as the girl who cowered in silence, but as the woman I was becoming.
Yes, I said. I will answer. I cared for Dr. Schmidt with the same devotion I have given to every patient in this hospital. If my crime is compassion, then I am guilty. But I will not apologize for saving a life.
Finally, she leaned back. You are bold, Miss O'Donnell, perhaps too bold. But I will not dismiss a nurse who has saved lives in the midst of this plague. You will remain here, on probation.
Relief flooded me, though I kept my face calm. I had won this battle, but I knew the war was far from over.
Margaret, they tried to take you from me, didn't they?
They tried, but I'm still here.
Then we'll face them, together.
And in that moment I knew, no matter what storms lay ahead, I was no longer fighting alone. Just as the first buds of spring appeared in Springfield, a letter arrived that tore through me like winter lightning. It was from Willow Creek. My hands shook as I unfolded it.
Margaret, you must come home. Lily is sick. Father is worse. We don't know how to manage. Robert, he is overwhelmed. Please, Margaret.
Every word weighed like a stone in my chest. Willow Creek. The place I had fled to save myself. The place where my childhood had been etched with fear and sorrow.
It's serious, but Margaret, you can't abandon your patients here.
I swallowed hard. My heart twisted. Could I leave Springfield? Could I leave the people who depended on me in this fragile city, fighting the last waves of influenza? And yet Lily, my little sister, I couldn't ignore her. That evening, I booked a train ticket home, every step heavy with dread. The rolling hills of Missouri stretched beneath me, familiar yet distant. Each mile reminded me of the yellow two-story house, my father's rage, the nights spent trembling beside my sister. When I arrived, the house smelled of old wood and decay. My father sat slouched in the corner, whiskey in hand, eyes sharper than I remembered. Robert looked haggard, shoulders bowed from responsibility. And Lily. She was pale, fevered, but when she saw me, a small, relieved smile flickered across her face. Mother had passed quietly the week before, her strength finally surrendered to years of labor and worry. I fell to my knees beside the bed she had left behind, her absence a hollow ache in my chest.
"Stay," my father muttered, voice rough. "Don't think you can leave again."
His words, once threatening, now felt empty, hollowed by age and illness. I knew I could not stay, not yet, but I also knew I could not turn my back on my family. I spent days nursing Lily back to health, tending my father as best I could, and trying to navigate the long, silent corridors of my childhood home. Shadows of the past lingered in every room, reminding me of fear, pain, and the girl I once was. And then came the letter from Springfield, a warning, stark and unforgiving. The hospital needed me back immediately. A new wave of influenza threatened the city, and they could not manage without me. I was torn between worlds, between love, duty, and the family that had shaped me in ways both cruel and tender. I realized something in that moment. Life would always demand a choice, often impossible ones, and strength meant facing them anyway. Springfield greeted me like a city that never slept. The streets smelled of coal and rain, the hospital looming like a fortress I had once called home. I stepped through its doors, uniform crisp, hands steady, but my heart was heavy with the weight of Willow Creek, the fevered children, my father's muttered regrets, and Lily's pale, trusting face. Nothing had changed. Patients still filled every cot, nurses moved like shadows, and the air was thick with exhaustion. But as I walked the corridors, I felt it. Eyes on me. Whispers. I had returned not as a student, but as someone who had tasted the world outside their scrutiny.
Margaret, he said softly, pulling me into a brief embrace. You came back.
I had to, I replied, but it doesn't mean it was easy.
And it wasn't. For every patient I tended, every fever I cooled, there were murmurs in the hall. Sister Beatrice had begun a campaign, subtle but relentless, insinuating that my devotion to William, now whispered openly as a romance, was compromising my work.
One afternoon, I overheard her whisper to Holloway, "If the board finds evidence of favoritism, she could lose everything. Let her heart blind her, and it will."
I clenched my fists. My heart did not blind me, it sharpened me. But I knew I had to be careful. One wrong step, and everything I had fought for, my career, my reputation, even William, could vanish. Yet in quiet moments, he was my sanctuary. We shared stolen glances, hidden notes, and brief touches in the stairwell. Our love, though risky, became a lifeline. It reminded me why I fought so fiercely, not for recognition, not for whispers, but for life itself, in all its chaos and beauty. Then, just when I began to feel some control, tragedy struck. A new wave of influenza hit the children's ward. Young patients I had grown attached to, the boy who loved marbles, the girl who hummed lullabies in the night, fell critically ill. Staff shortages meant I had to make impossible decisions. Who would get the limited medicine first? Who could wait? Each choice felt like a betrayal. In one sleepless night, I held the small, trembling body of a child as his breath slowed and slowed, the rise and fall of his chest growing shallower.
I whispered every prayer I knew, rubbing his tiny hands, willing life to cling.
When he slipped away, I felt rage and sorrow collide. How could the world be so cruel? And yet, I could not stop, not for a single moment. Springfield had never seemed so small. The shadow of my father outside my dormitory window made my chest tighten, my hands tremble. I had run from Willow Creek once, chasing freedom and purpose, but some ghosts were relentless. I opened the door cautiously. Frank Taylor, older, heavier, yet with the same hard-set jaw and cold eyes, stepped inside. He looked at me, then around the dormitory, and let out a slow, bitter laugh. "You thought you could escape, Margaret, but you can't hide from your blood. Father, what are you doing here? You've been running from your responsibilities, from your family, from me. But now I've come to see what you've become. I hear whispers, Margaret, whispers about you and the doctor." My stomach dropped. He knew. Somehow he knew. "You don't understand. I understand more than you think. You've forgotten what it means to obey, to respect the family that made you. You think your hands are pure, that your love is noble. You've defied everything I ever taught you. I've lived my life saving people, Father. I've healed what I could. I've given care where there was none. That is my life, not fear, not your approval, not the past you cling to." He paused, the rage in his gaze flickering for just a second, replaced by a strange, unreadable expression. Then, without warning, he slammed the wall beside me, leaving a crack that mirrored the fracture in our relationship. "I came to warn you. You think Springfield is safe. You think love shields you. But your choices, they will cost you." Before I could respond, he turned and left, vanishing into the night, leaving the echo of his threats and a tidal wave of old fear and unresolved anger behind. I sank to the floor, shaking. My life, my love, my career, all had been built on escaping him, and now he had walked back into it. The safety I had fought so hard to create felt suddenly fragile, as if the walls of the hospital, the corridors of Springfield, could crumble under his shadow. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something stronger. I was no longer the frightened little girl hiding behind the kitchen door. I had faced death, heartbreak, and disease. I had saved lives in the midst of chaos. And now, for the first time, I realized I would not allow him or anyone to dictate my story again. Yet I knew one thing with piercing clarity: the battle was far from over. The next morning, a letter awaited me on my bed. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet urgent. I opened it with trembling fingers. The words inside chilled me to the bone. Margaret Wilson Taylor, if you value your life and your love, meet me tonight behind Mercy Hospital. Come alone. And I knew this was no ordinary threat. Night fell over Springfield like a heavy curtain, and the hospital's dim lights flickered along the brick corridors. I gripped the letter in my hand, heart hammering, trying to steady my breath. Every instinct screamed at me not to go, but something stronger urged me forward. The need to face fear head-on. I slipped through the hospital's side exit, careful to avoid the night staff, and made my way to the back, the shadows stretching long and dark across the empty alley. My fingers tightened around the pocket of my coat, where I kept a small medical knife, a last resort, though I hoped I would never need it. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. Tall, imposing, features obscured by a brimmed hat. I froze, my pulse thundering. "Margaret," the voice hissed, low, familiar, and full of venom. I stepped back. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure laughed, a sound that made my teeth ache. "You think love and heroism make you untouchable? You think saving lives shields you from consequences?" I felt a rush of memories, the fear of Willow Creek, my father's tyranny, every moment I had ever stood up to the world despite trembling knees. I squared my shoulders. "I've survived death, disease, and despair. You are nothing compared to that." From the shadows a knife glinted. I caught my breath, heart leaping into my throat. My hands, steady from years of surgical precision, gripped the handle of the small knife in my coat. But before the figure could strike, a voice rang out, clear, commanding, and filled with concern. "Margaret, step back!" William stepped into the light, eyes blazing with fear and determination. Without hesitation, he charged, using his weight to shove the figure back. A scuffle ensued, and I found myself pushing forward, joining him in the fight, not as a victim, but as a woman who had spent decades saving others. The struggle ended abruptly when the shadow fled, disappearing into the night like smoke. Heart racing, breath ragged, I clung to William. Who was that?" I asked, shaking. "I don't know, but you're safe, and I promise, I will never let anyone hurt you while I'm here." For the first time that night, relief washed over me. We stood together, two souls tested by plague, love, and life's darkest moments. And as I looked into his eyes, I realized something profound. We were stronger together, and nothing, not even the past, could break that. Yet even as we embraced, a shiver ran down my spine. The threat was gone for now, but someone wanted to see me fall. And the question that haunted me was, who and why? As the city slept and the wind whispered through the empty streets, I noticed a piece of paper pinned to the hospital door, simple, white and chilling. "Tonight was only the beginning, Margaret. You cannot outrun your past." I clutched it in my hand, feeling both dread and resolve. Tomorrow, everything would change. Dawn in Springfield was pale and quiet, a fragile light creeping over the hospital rooftops. I stood in the empty corridor, the warning from last night still burning in my mind. Tonight was only the beginning, Margaret. You cannot outrun your past. But this time, I refused fear. I had spent my life facing death, illness, and despair. I had held babies as they took their first breath. I had grieved with families. I had saved Dr. Schmidt when the influenza threatened to steal him from me. And now, I would face the past, my father, and the shadows he had cast over my life. I returned to Willow Creek later that day. The train carried me over the rolling Ozark Hills, each mile a reminder of childhood pain, of the empty cradle, of my father's whispered words. You should never have been born. The yellow two-story house loomed ahead, smaller now, worn by time. Inside, my father sat, whiskey in hand, eyes colder than ever. But I had changed. I no longer trembled. "Margaret," he said, surprised, almost off guard. "You came back." "I did," I replied, steady and calm. "Not for you, not for Robert, not even for Lily. I came back for me, to close the door on the past and reclaim my life." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The power he once held over me had vanished. I looked at him, the man who had tried to shape my world with cruelty, and I felt nothing but pity. "I've spent decades healing, loving, and saving lives," I said. "I've built a life from pain, and I will not let your bitterness touch it again. Whatever you think you can do, whatever threats you whisper, they no longer matter." He said nothing. For the first time, his silence spoke louder than any tirade. I turned to Lily, healthy now, a bright young woman full of hope, and to Robert, worn but steady. "I forgive you," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of a lifetime. "Not because you asked, not because you deserved it, but because I am free now. Free to live, free to love, free to be who I was meant to be." And then, I returned to Springfield, to William, to the hospital that had become my second home. The corridors smelled of antiseptic, of life, and I walked them with a new kind of power. I was no longer the frightened girl hiding behind a kitchen door. I was Margaret Wilson Taylor, nurse, healer, survivor, lover, and woman unbroken. That evening, William took my hand in the quiet of the empty ward. "You came back," he said, voice soft, "not just to me, but to life." I smiled, feeling the years of pain, fear, and struggle melt away into something beautiful. "I did," I whispered, "and I'll keep coming back, as long as there's life to touch and love to share." Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The world was still imperfect, still dangerous, but it was ours. We had faced storms, battled shadows, and emerged stronger, hearts entwined, souls unbroken. And as I leaned against William, feeling his steady heartbeat, I knew this. The cradle that had once been empty, the wounds of my childhood, the whispered cruelties of my father, they had all led me here, to love, to purpose, to life fully lived. The past had tried to break me, but I had built a life so strong that even its darkest shadows could not touch me. For the first time, I felt complete. The door of the hospital opened, a gentle wind carrying the scent of spring. And I stepped forward, ready for whatever came next, knowing I had finally arrived home.